Why is everyone crashing their BMW G80 M3? It seems like every day I open TikTok, there's a new BMW G80 M3 sitting in a ditch. And it's become so much to the point that the insurance on these cars are becoming crazy. So I decided to sit back and actually think, something most of you guys don't do. I just started to think, why are so many people crashing this car? What is so special about this specific car that most of them end up being in a ditch? Because when you look at this car on paper, it's not that crazy to drive. We're talking about an only, and I know that's crazy to say, but compared to other cars, it's only 500 horsepower. And most of these cars come with X-Drive, in other words, all-wheel drive. And after driving one of these cars myself, the M3 is one of the easier cars that I've driven. I kid you not. Coming from someone with a 700 horsepower rear-wheel drive car, an M3 is not a hard car to drive at all. But then I started thinking, if that's the case, why do so many people crash this car? And then it actually made sense to me. So I've spent the last few days gathering every single possibility why this car ends up the way it does. And here's everything I figured out. And we're gonna begin with the number one most obvious part. And that's the fact that the G80 M3 has become a status symbol for young guys on TikTok. It's flashy, it's fast, and it's extremely easy to finance. In other words, it's a TikTok trend car. Every single 17-year-old who's up a $20 profit in their trading business will walk into a BMW dealership and sign their life away for this car. Like, I'm serious when I say this. Go on TikTok right now and go in the search bar and just type in, "I just bought my dream car." 80% of the cars that show up would either be a G80 M3 or a G80 M4. Either of the two, it's the same thing. Or maybe even a C8 Corvette, but we're not talking about that in this video. And it's crazy because this is a pattern, it's an evolution. This has always been a thing, but for some reason, it's this car now. Like back in the day, the TikTok dream car was either a Mercedes C63 or let's say a BMW F80 M4, you know? There's just always been that trend where there's one specific car to become a TikTok car. And right now, it just happens to be the M3. But you're probably wondering, how on earth does that contribute to the fact that these cars end up in ditches? And that will bring me to my next topic, which is, this is too much car for too little skill. When these guys go ahead and buy these cars, these TikTok gurus, they're typically coming from a Honda Civic or Toyota Corolla, or most of the time it's even their first cars. But this is something I like to call the Mustang effect. If you guys remember a few years back, there was this nickname we gave to Mustangs and the drivers. We called them crowd killers. We called them this because they just always somehow ended up in a ditch, driving out of a car meet, just driving their car in general. They always wanted to show off, and that typically led to them spinning out, crashing into a crowd of people, or just crashing into a tree and totaling their car. There was always something with Mustangs that was different from other cars. And you know what that was? Too much power for too little skill. 16, 17, and even 18-year-olds. They are buying these cars. They think it's just as easy to control and just as approachable as their previous Toyota Corolla. They think the only difference is that it looks cooler, it's more expensive, and it's faster. Of course, these are the major differences, but they're also forgetting the part that a car with more power will take way more skill and patience to approach. Think about it. 500 horsepower, rear-wheel drive or all-wheel drive, instant torque, and the unpredictability of turbo lag is just way too much for someone coming from, let's say, a naturally aspirated Civic without warming anything up, and they think the car will just grip perfectly and they don't have to do anything else like it would have been in their previous car. But in reality, that's not the truth. Most of the times, if you do that, and thanks to physics, your car would spin out, right? It would fishtail, and that's when you're gonna have to counter steer to correct the car. But wait, these guys don't even know what counter steering is either. They don't understand the concept of it, because when you see a G80 spin out, they're almost never trying to correct the car. You see it crash and you're like, bro, that was the most savable thing I've ever seen in my life. But then you remember it's a 16-year-old dummy in that car. And although when you think of an all-wheel drive car, you expect it to be safer, and I feel like that's also a trap, because when people get this car, they approach it thinking, oh, it's X-Drive, it's all-wheel drive, I'm gonna be fine to just drive it how I want. And then they underestimate it simply because of that, when in reality, even the fact that it's an all-wheel drive is still powerful enough car to get sideways on you, especially when you don't warm up the tires properly, or you do it from such a low gear. You still need a little bit of skill to drive a powerful all-wheel drive car, you know? But I don't know, because at least for the Mustang, you can give them the benefit of the doubt. It was a rear-wheel drive car, and it's arguably a harder platform to control than an all-wheel drive G80. But I don't know, it seems like more G80s have crashed more than any other Mustang ever did, even in its crowd-killing era. But I'm sure you guys are wondering, how do these kids even afford this car? How do they afford the G80? Because mind you, this is not even a cheap car. It's not cheap in any means. We're not talking about a $20,000 car that you could afford just by working at McDonald's and going to pick this up. We're talking about a BMW G80 that goes from about $70K to give or take $100,000 plus, depending on how you spec it out. If it's new, used, all sorts of that. But the realistic thing is, you're not going to find this car for anything under $70,000. At least nothing clean title. So how are 16, 17, and 18-year-olds affording it? How are they getting a car this expensive in the first place to even crash it? That's the main question, but it's something I like to call the financing trap. These cars, just think of it like the Hellcat. The people who sell them, the dealerships, they know their target audience. They know the people who want to buy these cars are just teenagers who are starting to make a decent amount of money and want to do nothing but flex. Teenagers who are willing to go into severe debt just to have the status of owning a BMW M3 at such a young age. So these lenders give them the loan for this car. They make it possible for them to buy it, but only with the cost of selling your soul. Okay, not literally, but they will trap them by putting them in the most insane financial predicaments. Now, I'm not saying I'm getting a G80 M3, but I was once shopping for one, and I noticed that I couldn't get any interest rates lower than 14%. And mind you, I'm 20 years old. Well, I was 19 at the time. But you know, I actually have a very good credit score, right? That's one. I have a good credit score, I have pretty good income for my age, and I have a paid off $70,000 car to my record. And now I'm not saying that's a flex or anything. I'm only saying that because my rates probably aren't even half as bad as the people who end up going to get this car. Yes, I mentioned all that stuff because my credit history is considered good for my age. Now imagine somebody 2 years younger with literally no credit history. Can you just imagine what APRs they're getting? So I feel like the people who got this car just stretched themselves financially thin just so they could get this car to flex, you know? And then they get behind the wheel with zero track time or understanding of car control, and you know exactly how that ends up. But before we move on to the next reason I feel like these cars get crashed way too much, I want to know your take on this specific question because it does tie into the next point. How much horsepower do you consider to be enough? Because these kids think 500 horsepower isn't that much, and they think it's just enough for them to control even though they have no experience. But then they get humbled, and they get humbled pretty bad. I personally went from a less than 200 horsepower Honda Accord to a 700 horsepower Corvette, and I respected the car, and that's why I still have it in one piece. But these people, they don't respect the car at all. So they crash. So go in the comments right now and tell me what amount of horsepower is enough. Oh yeah, and while you guys are typing that, I also had some questions about that specific poster on the back on how I got that poster. 1 second, let me go grab it for you. Yes, if you guys were wondering where I got this poster, I actually make these myself. I personally make them and I ship it out to you guys. No drop shipping, I don't do none of that. I design it and I make it for you guys. Look, I even have one for the G80 M3. How fitting. So if you guys want one for yourself, I do custom cars. This is literally my car. I do pre-made cars. I do bundles. I do everything. Just go to socialorbitstudios.com or go to the first link in my bio or the pinned comment and get yourself a nice poster. I'll personally make it for you myself. But let's get back to the video. You guys aren't here for that. But that does bring me to my next topic on why these cars always end up in a ditch. That is the point that on social media, 700 horsepower is the starting point. That's just the mentality they have. TikTok and social media has normalized insane horsepower numbers. I'm telling you, if you go on TikTok and you start scrolling, you're going to see cars that are insanely fast. I'm talking about full bolt-ons, E85, fully built Hellcats. You see GTRs, Mustangs, ZR1s, and then you'd get out of TikTok thinking because that's the normal car you see on there, the normal car on TikTok is 2,000 horsepower. You could go and drive your 500 horsepower car like it's a Toyota Corolla with zero consequences. When in reality, that's an extremely unhealthy mindset. I've made a whole video about this on how social media has ruined the car culture, and I don't want to just keep regurgitating the same ideas I had in that video. So if you do want to go check that out, check it out after this one. I'll leave a link at the end. But it's just an overall toxic mindset. The mindset that 700 horsepower is the starting point. It's to the point where you have people who constantly call a Hellcat that's a 700 horsepower car slow. Let me tell you this, if you race a Hellcat at a speed where it actually puts down the power, you are cooked. You're getting sent to Applebee's or Gapplebee's, whatever they say. I'm not even joking. Ask me how I know. Actually, no, don't ask me because I've never lost to a Hellcat. Imagine me losing to a Hellcat with a Z06. What the hell? But yeah, people see these powerful cars and they think a G80 is nothing compared to it. So they go get those cars and even go ahead and start modding these cars, not knowing that 500 horsepower or what 523 in the new models is more than enough. It's respectable, but they don't respect it. And then, you know, the inevitable happens. But finally though, when you combine all these things that I've mentioned in the video, it's only a matter of time. And this is not just about the G80. If any car was like this, disaster is bound to happen. You combine inexperience, debt, social media validation, and 500 horsepower, disaster is bound to happen. The G80 M3 isn't dangerous, the same way that the Mustang GT wasn't dangerous. The mindset is. The fact that anybody can have access to this car and the fact that it's the car to have on TikTok, that's what causes so much crashes to happen. That being said, it's still an absolute gorgeous car and I would never deter anybody from getting it. But if you do, just be safe and respect it. 500 plus horsepower is plenty enough to get you in trouble, or even worse. Take it easy, my friends, and until next time.